Good afternoon, friends. Welcome to this seminar on green industrial policy globally and lessons for India. And we have to take us through this theme, a very distinguished panel with Professor Kelly Sims Gallagher, Dean of the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, the premier center of diplomacy and international affairs in the world, if I could say. And then joining her on the panel, Mr. Ajay Shankar, who is very well known to this audience, and Dr. Dhruba Purkayastha from next door, the CEEW, colleague of Dr. Arunabha Ghosh, who could not be with us because of some other prior commitment. Now, I'd say a word about the theme and a word about our distinguished speakers of this afternoon. The green industrial, policy and green industrialization actually represents a major opportunity for late industrializers like India, because it offers to us an opportunity to create jobs and incomes while also decarbonizing the economy. And in the past decade or so, there has been a lot of movement towards different countries adopting green industrialization. And in a way, green industrialization debate has helped to revive the focus on industrial policy. Because industrial policy, as we all know, had become a bad word many years ago in the context of hyper-globalization. So everybody thought, why you need industrial policy? Globalization and global economic integration will take care, market forces will take care of everything. You don't need any industrial policy. But suddenly, there is a surge of actions which can be counted among the industrial policy interventions. And the champions of this movement towards industrial policy are none other than the erstwhile champions of free markets in the world, including United States. And, today you read a lot about Mr. Trump as President of India, President of United States, sorry, yes, doing on a day-to-day basis, off and on kind of tariff, declarations. But way back, in several years, including in 2022, when President Biden announced three major acts, the Inflation Reduction Act, the Chips and Science Act, and the Infrastructure Act. The three acts put together a lot of money, more than $1 trillion, I think, on the table to support manufacturing, particularly of green variety, like solar PV cells, manufacturing, the EVs and batteries, among other things, semiconductors included. So since then, there has been a rapid progression towards adoption of industrial policy actions, and we will hear today. Europe has followed the same playbook with the new Green Deal policy adopted soon after the three acts of President Biden. And they have a number of initiatives and interventions, including CBAM, which is also a part of industrial policy, broader industrial policy, to get kind of space for the domestic industry to be revived. So now with President Trump is taking this trend very far with this reciprocal tariffs and all others, sometimes maybe too far. It would be interesting to hear from Kelly what she thinks of the current, policy actions that government is adopting in United States. So I don't want to just say anything more on this theme, because this is what our discussion is today. So just briefly introduce Professor Kelly Gallagher. She wears many hats. She has been a professor of energy and environmental policy at Tufts University's Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. She has also been directing the Climate Policy Lab and the Center for International Environment and Resource Policy at the Fletcher School. And in last year, in 2024, September, she was named as the dean of this very premier college or school, if you like. She has also served in the White House as a senior advisor in the time of President Obama, advising the government of United States on the climate policy. And many writings and many other affiliations and board memberships. But on top of everything, I think she is, and anybody who has followed her writings in foreign affairs and other places knows that she is a thought leader in this area. And I hope your new responsibilities at the school will not diminish your writings and, very powerful writings that you have been doing. So welcome, Kelly. And then Mr. Ajay Shankar is known to everyone in this room. But for you, Kelly, Mr. Shankar, as I was telling you, has been one of our major, sort of authority on industrial policy. Earlier, as a practitioner, as an industry secretary in the government of India, then Secretary General or Member Secretary of the National Manufacturing Competitiveness Council. And then after that, he has been sort of devoting his time to thinking aloud and writing. A lot of, writings he's doing in the public domain. And you see his columns in different newspapers. And he has also been a mentor and advisor at the ISID as a member of our board and a distinguished senior fellow. So, and then Dr. Dhruba Purkasta is Director of Growth and International Institutional Advancement at CW. CW has emerged, as everyone knows, a major center or think tank on environment, energy, and water related issues or sustainable development related issues. So we have a very great panel. So welcome all of you. And not only those in the room, but also those who are joining online, because it's a hybrid workshop. And these days, there are more people outside the room who join the seminar than those in the room after COVID. So this is a new trend. So welcome once again. And with these words, I welcome Kelly, and over to you. Okay. You can speak from here or there.
I'll stay here.
Oh, perfect.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Nagesh. It's a great pleasure to be here again and to see you. I thought I would try to cover three topics. First, to tell a little bit about the China story of green industrialization, which is probably what I've spent the most time over my career studying, beginning with my doctoral research in the 1990s on the development of China's automobile industry. And then I will spend a little bit of time on the US story, which is very different. And I can't help, as an American, but compare and contrast the differences between these two stories. And then for me, in the last 10 years, I've really expanded my scope and tried to better understand the story of major emerging economies. And that's the focus of our climate policy lab at the Fletcher School. And I'll spend much less time there and certainly defer to the expertise in the room. So let's begin with the China story. When I first went to China, which was 1996, I think the situation in China at the time was that in general, and not even thinking about green industrialization, China was very behind, with a strong intention to catch up. But at the time, and this was when I was just beginning my doctoral research, the industry was what Justin Ifulin called comparative advantage defying. There was a number of very heavy industry manufacturing facilities, but light manufacturing had not really yet begun. They didn't have modern technology, and they were desperate to figure out how to find it, how to acquire it, how to bring it into the country, and how to begin to adjust the industrial structure of the country. So it was a heavy industry and agriculture, basically. And it's hard to believe this, but this was truly the case in the 1990s. I mean, it doesn't feel that long ago, right? And China has completely transformed from that period. And so I feel very fortunate that I remember like being there on the ground, witnessing this. And I studied the 3 U.S.-China automotive joint ventures. The automobile industry was interesting to me because it was one of the 4 pillar industries that China established. So their strategy was to designate 4 pillar industries, which would have lots of backward linkages to the rest of the economy. And the auto industry was one of those. In fact, they had designated it as a pillar industry in 1994. And their strategy for technology acquisition was a strategy of primarily of joint ventures, establishing joint ventures, and kind of later licensing. And so I think that was sort of the period of the 1990s, not just in the auto industry, but more generally, establishing these pillar industries, trying to create industrial clusters, and then trying to acquire more advanced technology through joint ventures. What I found was that the Chinese firms didn't even really know what to ask for in their negotiations with their joint venture partners, ended up not getting very advanced technology, became very frustrated in their joint venture arrangements because they were stuck. They were stuck in them. They had signed 20-year contracts, and that the American partners, but it wasn't just the U.S. Joint venture partners, were pretty stingy as well. It wasn't like they were offering more advanced technology or suggesting more advanced technology. And I was very interested in whether cleaner technology, cleaner and more efficient technology was transferred. And the simple answer to that is no. The Chinese didn't ask for it. They didn't even think to ask for it. And the foreign firms did not suggest or offer. So no catalytic converters, electronic fuel injection, nothing advanced was transferred. And so I had this sort of blinding insight at one point that there was just a failure of leapfrogging. I'm sure you're all familiar with the concept of leapfrogging. And it was a simple product of a lack of incentives. There were no policies in place to motivate the transfer of cleaner and more efficient technology. And indeed, once the Chinese government put in place the very first fuel efficiency standards, the very first pollution control standards, the foreign joint venture partners immediately transferred technology to the Chinese, but only to meet the level of the standards. So they continued to transfer older, outdated equipment. And, over time, the Chinese ratcheted up their standards and motivated more of the technology transfer, and eventually, in many cases, broke out of the joint ventures. And then, I'm getting way ahead of myself, new electric vehicle companies sprang up that were completely independent. So the year 2000 was a very important year in China. That was the year China entered the WTO, and that really enabled what I think of as the China development model, which was export-led development. It allowed China to establish very strong manufacturing sector, lighter manufacturing, and we saw very strong concentrations of industrial clusters begin to emerge, primarily initially in the special economic zones, but then all over China. At this time, we started to see many short, medium, and long-term plans for different industry sectors and subsectors. This was on top of China's regular 5-year planning cycle. I love how China plans because they're so transparent about here's our plan, and then you can watch and see whether or not they execute against the plan. So for a foreign researcher, it's really helpful. But they were just many plans emerging. So there was a strong planning culture, and that allowed the provinces and the localities and municipalities to begin to execute against the plans, and to, these plans clarified priorities. And I would characterize 2000 to 2010 as a catch-up decade. That was when China was in this very rapid period of technological assimilation, learning, and catching up. And then starting in 2000 was when China started to catch up in some industries. And at that time, I happened to be on sabbatical in 2010 and living at Tsinghua University as a visiting professor. And I did the research for my second book, which was called The Globalization of Clean Energy Technology, Lessons from China. And so I just happened to be there at the dawn of the solar PV industry, the battery electric vehicle industry. I also looked at coal gasification and gas turbines. Those were the 4 case studies. And that was, I think, when we saw this sort of beginning of private enterprise, and this very rapid advancement of manufacturing capacity. And the strategy shifted. The Chinese strategy really shifted. You had private entrepreneurs who were accessing capital from foreign investors, from state-owned banks, from local governments. They were awash in capital, had no trouble going out to buy technology and license technology. Many of them had been educated overseas and had returned to China, and were convinced that they could reduce costs through the efficiency of Chinese manufacturing, and then begin to export. And they were well aware, because of their foreign studies, of markets being created around the world, in Germany, in Spain, in the United States, in Australia, through policies that were being established. And so that decade, I think, was a decade of catching, basically being caught up and then starting to surge ahead. And now here we are in the 2020s, and I would say China's decisively ahead in some industries where they've really tried. Not in all. So I think gas turbines is a great example. They didn't try, and they have not caught up. But where they tried, they did catch up, and now I think are ahead of the United States, certainly in battery technology, electric vehicles, and more. And so we're in an intensely competitive environment now with China. So what do I attribute China's success to? First, I would say a systemic approach. They both pushed new technologies into the marketplace and had a system to also pull new technologies into the market. They did a lot of market creation at home, but they also noticed market creation overseas. I would say this has been in some ways, a very rapid process, but I think to the Chinese, it felt like this gradual gradual process, but slow and steady and consistent. So the long-term plans have been adhered to. And the consistent signaling from the market from the government of what the expectations are for the marketplace. I think contrary to most people's understanding of China, where they think the government controls everything, what we've really seen in the green industries is actually the green industries have been largely developed privately. Private entrepreneurs, backed by the government, but these are private entrepreneurs with incredible access to finance. Finance has not been a constraint in China, and a very competitive domestic environment. And this has led actually to some problems for China. There's a lot of copycat industrial activity. Every province wants to have their own, whatever it is, solar company, a battery electric vehicle company. And so you get what they call repetitive production or excess surplus capacity. And then that causes an oversupply, not just in the domestic market, but in the international market. That has been good and bad. Good in the sense that it's, helped bring the costs down dramatically of some of these technologies, but it's put a lot of other companies out of business and is perceived by a lot of other countries as dumping on the global market. I think the other thing we can notice about China is a very impressive growth in government-funded RD&D across a pretty wide portfolio. And if you go to our website, which is very simple to remember, climatepolicylab.org, and click on the data center, data tab, we have a database where we are tracking global energy RD&D, research, development, and demonstration. And in the year 2000, I checked this morning, China ranked 14th globally in energy RD&D, public energy RD&D. In the year 2010, it had jumped to 4th position. And for the last year, we have data from China, which was 2022. It was ranked 2nd. And I don't want to get ahead of myself to the Trump administration, but I think the Trump administration is likely to drastically cut back U.S. RD&D, and that will put China in the #1 position. So again, slow, steady growth if you look at this trajectory over time, but a very determined approach to increasing innovation capacity in China. And so today we find ourselves, witnessing China dominating global markets in a lot of these clean energy industries. Domestically, it's already surpassed its target of 1,200 gigawatts of wind and solar capacity, 6 years ahead of their plan. They also have achieved 50% of domestic sales in battery electric vehicles, also ahead of plan. And last year in 2024, renewables accounted for 86% of new capacity, new electricity capacity. But I would note they're still building coal, largely as peaking plants, which is kind of a hard thing to understand. But China doesn't have any gas, and its hydro is pretty much totally exploited. So the only option really is either coal or storage. I was in China in December and went and visited one of their first grid level storage plants. And they are achieving some success with grid level storage. So now to turn to the US story, I would characterize that as a zigs and zags, kind of the opposite of China, which has been slow, steady, consistent. The US story just big zigzags. With one constant up until today, which is steady investment in energy research, development, and demonstration. So I'm going to start the same period, 1990s, Clinton-Gore administration, Democratic administration. early days in RD&D on clean energy. They established the partnership for a new generation of vehicles. They were very excited about, an electric vehicle future, and in particular, starting with hybrid electric vehicles. There was some early government procurement for, cleaner technologies like LEDs, LED light bulbs. They attempted a gas tax, which failed. And it was at the very early stages of the shale gas revolution, which the US government had worked on for many, many years as well, drilling technology and so forth. The 2000s were characterized by a shift in emphasis. This was the George W. Bush years. Much stronger focus on clean coal, nuclear, hydrogen, and fuel cell vehicles. So not interested in hybrids and electric, but rather fuel cell vehicles, much more of an emphasis on fossil fuels. The energy secretary at the time characterized his strategy as an all of the above strategy. He was the former governor of Texas. And then we had the 2010s, President Obama, and you'll remember he inherited a recession and passed the American Reinvestment and Recovery Act, which provided the biggest surge in energy research, development, and demonstration since the 1970s. So again, if you go to our website, you can also see a separate US database, and you see this very sharp spike in US energy RD&D investments. They established a new innovation institution called ARPA-E, Advanced Research Projects Agency for Energy, which was modeled after DARPA, which was the sort of innovation engine at the Department of Defense. They tried to pass a climate bill, which failed, known as the Waxman-Markey bill, which would have for the first time created a market, a cap and trade program and a market-driven system. But that failed. And there's very little attention to manufacturing. It just wasn't the main focus. So we were kind of still in a technology push mentality. And then we had the first Trump administration, 2017 to 21. Obviously a very sharp reversal at the global level, withdrawal from the Paris Agreement and so forth. But interestingly, sustained growth in energy RD&D, including even in renewables and efficiency. And this was despite the fact that he every year submitted budget requests to Congress that would have eliminated spending on those clean energy technologies. And Congress just essentially ignored the budget requests and continued to fund and actually to grow, government investments in clean energy RD&D. Obviously, no movement forward. The Trump administration tried to reverse a lot of the regulatory work. So there had been more advanced CO2 performance standards that had been promulgated under the Obama administration for motor vehicles, and they attempted a clean power plan. He attempted to roll a lot of that back. Ultimately, that failed in the courts, but it did slow down deployment of these cleaner energy technologies. So then we come to Biden, who also then inherited a recession coming out of COVID. And I think you all know we had what we call in the United States Bill and Ira, the two American men first names. The Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the CHIPS and Science Act, and the Inflation Reduction Act. The Bipartisan Infrastructure Law actually was really focused on the infrastructure needed to deploy clean energy and battery electric vehicles. CHIPS and Science had another big infusion of energy RD&D authorization. And then the Inflation Reduction Act finally, for the first time, established big manufacturing incentives, investment tax credits, production tax credits, and about $275 million, sorry, not million, $billion went out the door during the last couple of years of the Biden administration, 80% of which went to the Republican states, red states, to establish new manufacturing facilities, especially in batteries, but also electric vehicle companies and so on and so forth. So we finally had a systemic approach of push and pull under the Biden administration, and he was 100% motivated by domestic job creation. That's what he cared about. That's what he was trying to achieve. And he saw, like the Chinese, green industry as being a great way to create new jobs for the 21st century. So here we are today, Trump 2. I would say market forces have taken hold in the United States. 90% of the new electricity capacity in 2024 was renewables, and most of that was solar and battery storage. 40% of that new capacity was in Texas and Florida, two of the reddest, most Republican states. So there's a lot of new jobs in these states. The US is still quite behind in battery electric vehicles, but we finally achieved 8% of new sales in battery electric vehicles. So we're in this strange position now with a big difference, which is that the Republicans control Congress. So I think for the first time, we're likely to see a big retrenchment and falling back in terms of investments in energy innovation. President Trump seems determined to slash federal government spending on research. He's also eliminating the workforce of most of the science agencies. And you can see he's also threatening universities, taking away research funding, and also, I think, trying to threaten the talent that we use. We have many international students who come, and we're very proud of our multinational workforce and talent in the United States. And so, although we don't know yet what the visa restrictions are going to be, he's definitely going to be doing something in terms of restricting visas. But there's a lot we don't know yet. It's really unclear if he's going to try to roll back the Inflation Reduction Act. I seriously doubt it because there's so many new jobs in these Republican states. I think he will lose support of the Republican congressmen. And he certainly already announced he's going to try to reverse again a lot of the regulations, the regulatory incentives, but we know that's likely to fail in the courts. And I think he's certainly already had a big impact in terms of slowing down the momentum at the international level in terms of global climate policy. So let me just conclude with a few comments, early learnings, I think, from our lab on major emerging economies. We're working in 10 countries around the world. And I think my observations about these countries, ranging from Vietnam to Brazil, are that these countries are searching for comparative advantage in green industry and trying to understand where they could find a niche and begin a green industrialization process. I think many countries want to do that. They want the job creation. They want the GDP growth associated with clean and green industries, but they're confronted now with a very dominant China in particular, and wondering how to ever compete with China. We're also, I think, entering a new era of tariffs, particularly in the global north, if we can call it that. Developing countries are trying to figure out how to navigate those tariffs and trying to understand if they can negotiate free trade agreements and individual or collective deals. And so I think we're in a very, very different period. We no longer can count on export-led development. And on top of that, the Europeans have imposed, the carbon border adjustment tax. And so they are strongly trying to incentivize low carbon imports. And I think many developing countries are facing challenges accessing low cost capital and also coping with foreign exchange restrictions. So in particular, some of the countries we're working with in Africa, this I think is a dominant challenge. So very, very different world that major emerging economies today are confronting compared with, say, the 1990s when China was just beginning its growth trajectory. So I'll stop there and look forward to questions.
Thank you, Kelly. I think it was fascinating to listen to this, very comprehensive overview of how it all started in China and, what we see today, China sitting the major dominant player with 85% share of global capacity in most of the green industries. How did it happen? And now when we try to catch up with it and build some of these capacities, so the challenge that everyone, including India, faces is, so you have done a very, sort of good job in putting on the table a very succinct but still comprehensive overview of this. Now, with that, I turn to our two panelists, and so Mr. Shankar, over to you, sir.
I should have asked this question before, but how many minutes and what would you do if you like me to talk about?
She's hard pressed for time. So for 7-8 minutes,
Yeah.
and then
any wish list from you? Okay. Okay. So first of all, I think it's an absolutely wonderful, lucid, comprehensive. So I've learned a lot. I would use my 7-8 minutes to try and have a look at the global picture. And the global picture is that the threat from global warming is real, and people across the world are experiencing it. But what puzzles some of us here is that why is civil society and government, the advanced countries, so slow in acting decisively? So if you look at last 30, 35 years, the real reduction in carbon emissions has happened only because gas and shale have replaced coal. And so significant changes have not happened. So my question, why not? And why so little? And any hope for decisive action in the coming years? Now, if one looks at the whole world, then clearly China, as you rightly said, is in a position to be the leader in moving towards a net zero economy because they have the state capacity, they have the technology, they have the deep pockets. And listening to you, I feel that they're taking off without announcing it. So they still stick to 2060 for net zero, but my sense is they could probably achieve it by 2040 if they want. Question to you. Europe, I find it surprising that last 6-7 years, even with the Greens being in power in Germany, forward movement has been very slow. So again, a question to you, why? Now I come to India. Because of our sheer size, what we will do in the next 3 decades would make all the difference to what happens to mankind because of our sheer size. So if we follow the US pattern and have that kind of per capita emissions, whatever else China and the US and Europe may do will not be good enough. Now, within India, there has been this tension or debate between our right to development and our right to carbon space. And that has been the dominant view in our negotiations. But fortunately, we have had prime ministers who've been very forward-looking. So in 2010, Prime Minister Manmohan Singh said we'll have a solar mission, 2022,000 megawatts by 22. I was in government then, and we all thought it just can't be done. And we don't have the money to subsidize that program. But today, our solar is over 100,000. So it's been an amazing success story. Then we have been very forward looking under the present Prime Minister. You may have been aware that uh, getting us to join to Paris was a big challenge for American diplomacy, but I think America succeeded, but I think Modi ji wanted to do it. And he has been upping the ambition level of India uh, a little ahead of his policy establishment. So 500 GW of non-fossil fuel capacity by 2030 announced in Glasgow, and I think we are moving on track. Now, in our forward movement, I think we have been so far lucky in adopting very smart policies. Because of shortage of time, I won't go there. I can share some written work on that. But in terms of the other big thing he's done is that we have a very well-funded hydrogen mission, which will be taking care of the hard-to-abate sectors. So we are moving in parallel on electricity and hard-to-abate sectors. And in electricity, in the last 3 years, we've had dramatic progress in movement towards large-scale grid storage. And pump storage is what we have chosen as the low-hanging fruit. There's a lot of private sector interest there. And only yesterday, I was surprised to find that the latest figure is 113 GW of pump storage proposals for environment clearance. And this is 113. Our total is only 500 GW by 2030, which is fossil fuel free, and of which we already have about 150 or so, 190. Now, on both the electricity side as well as, no, one more point. In the electric vehicle space, we have succeeded in ways which has surprised everybody. So I think Delhi has about, from zero now, about 7,000 or 6,500 electric cabs. We have the largest set of electric buses running all over India, starting from scratch in 2 years back. But in terms of manufacturing and deployment in the green transition, we are still in the paradigm which we've had in the rest of industry, that we believe in free markets. And therefore, if it is cheaper to import, we import. If it is cheaper to do license production, we do that. And so far, India is not yet a significant player in substance on technology development. I mean, our rhetoric is large, but we are where probably China was in the mid-90s. And I hope that we will actually leapfrog there, but I couldn't say with confidence that we've got our act together. But irrespective of whether we become technology developers or not, the fact is that in this global free market regime, which was there till now, the solar power sold in India is the cheapest in the world, using Chinese panels and our deployment and maintenance. And similarly, our electric vehicles are one of the cheapest in the world. And therefore, in the 2-3-wheeler space, they are taking over market share almost fully, with very modest financial support from the government. So on the whole, I'm pretty optimistic that with the parallel movement on hard-to-abate sectors, which is through the hydrogen mission, and the momentum we've already acquired on renewables and storage, I think we are very well poised to moving towards a more optimistic scenario where India would be in terms of the global struggle of climate change. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shankar. I think it was expected of you to give the Indian perspective, and which you did very well, very authoritatively. So let me turn to Dhrubo. You have the floor.
Yeah, good afternoon, and thank you. After the China story, the America story, and the India story partly, or India's vision, let me also start with going back, let's say, 2.5 decades, 25, 30 years ago. And I'll give you a small approach of Indian states, which will correlate to what we are talking about, industrial policy. And I think, Dr. Nagesh, you started with that point and saying Indian industrial policy had become almost an anathema at some point of time, and it is a bad thing to do. So I'll give you an example here. Without naming the state, it was like it was one of the eastern states where I used to work for a rating agency, as in their advisory work. And the whole idea was the states were getting to development as to how do I develop, how do I grow. And the whole idea was at that point of time, and I saw that in many Indian states, including the government of India, is like we do not need to get into manufacturing. We don't need to, we will leapfrog into services. So here I was talking about how to invite and how to get investments into the state, which is core investments in automotive, core investments in automotive value chains, and therefore there will be jobs created. And there was the bureaucracy directing itself to saying, we don't need all that. We will be services, will leapfrog to services. Yeah. So this is the starting point at every state almost, that the picture that was emerging in India through, let's say, late 90s to, let's say, around 2008, 10, or even up to 2013, 14. And I used to be in the World Bank then. I used to be a staff in the World Bank. And for us, it was like, okay, we need investment climate, you need doing business, and therefore doing business has to improve. I think, Mr. Shankar, you were also involved at some ways into the doing business initiative, or maybe by that time. Yeah, you were at some point. You wear many hats. In fact, you also wore a hat at the power secretary, the power secretary during the privatization of power in Delhi. So I had the occasions of engaging with Mr. Shankar then also when he was in the industries department, and also, by the way, in NMCC also. So coming back to that same story, I'll go to green industrialization just in a while. But the fact remains that I was looking at it and, well, all fed on certain amount of textbooks, which though guide you, academia guides you, whether it's Porter's, competitive advantage of nations, they talk of demand conditions, supporting industries, and I'll relate each of them, factor advantages. Then came Hosman and Roderick, binding constraints. And this is a famous example that Hosman is to give, was about monkeys jumping from trees as to how you go ahead in what you produce. The complexity of what you produce defines. But if you look at India, India's export competitiveness is manufacturing over the last, probably it's coming back now, but it's India's intervention in manufacturing stayed at the concept level of saying India's industrial policy stayed for many years, it stayed at the level of government has no business for being in business. Now, that was a policy. Well, services did well, but let's understand that India had been subject to a lot of jobless growth, a lot of situations. And if you look at manufacturing share of GDP, you're still in that problem. Manufacturing still remains 15% of your output. Your agriculture tends to support 50%. When your output is 17, it tends to support. So, yes, services has done well, but beyond a point, I think this is the shift, and I think the shift has happened with Make in India, PLI, semiconductor schemes. You see that shift going back, but I think we have lost decades in between of not intervening into the market. I think at some level, Indian policymakers took Washington consensus too seriously to say that no, this is not, yeah, seriously, Washington. Too seriously in saying that look, this has to be markets, this has to be leave this. This is markets function. And I'm glad to hear something. It's like too seriously saying this markets will take care, not until you intervene at the right and you tilt. Now we are faced with saying Paris, or even before Paris, you're faced with green. And how do you solve? This is a market failure. Now, there is another extreme to think that markets will solve for market failures. I can't comprehend that. You need to intervene. Here, it's like basic classic situation. It is a market failure. Private industry is not incentivized to reduce because private incentive. Now, this is the debate between Are we a stakeholder capitalism? We are still a shareholder capitalism. We are a shareholder driven society. If we are shareholder, then return over equity becomes important. And then you need to price it or pay for it or do something to tilt. And herein, just I'll come in with green. See, what appears to be a private industry in India has actually been created by the government, and I'll give you why. India's solar industry is a private initiative, but you brought to table by the government, brought to table by the procurement of solar, which has tilted the preferences in any which way. Whether you look at energy efficiency, the LED, that's tilted by government. And then what happens is, whether it is EV, it's a lot tilted by government because then your scale and scope drives costs down, and therefore that's the efficiency that you're looking for. So in green industrial policy, we need greening of industrial procurement. I'm not CBAM, okay. Well, one way to deal with CBAM is possibly impose that tax over here. EU will allow that offsetting for that matter, and therefore redirect in that cess form to incentivize the industry, whether steel and hard to abate. So you do need standards, you do need greening of public procurement, and you need suitable incentive structures which are on a net present value zero on an economic return, because then you will make it. It's like going back when we could not deal with water. We said, okay, you subsidize water. Today you can't price it. You subsidize that water transport over here. After 5 years, you will make that money return. So the subsidies for the government on a net present value, not getting into discount rates. Maybe Lord Stern said government should discount at 2%. It's difficult to do that. But at whatever discounting rates of economic value, you take that towards and think about saying we do need, but India, I'll end here, still faces the challenge of how we grow rather equitably, and that's a serious problem. At the same time, decarbonize on per unit of output and growth. Thank you. That's a difficult challenge.
Thank you, Dhruva, for adding to this what was already very rich discussion, some very important points. Now, before inviting Kelly to respond to some of the questions that Mr. Shankar posed to her, maybe we can collect a couple of them and then we end with her closing remarks. Any? Yes, one over there. Yes, go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah. Oh, okay.
Are there any lessons in designing of the RD&D structures beyond just the funding amounts? Are there any lessons in design of RD&D programs or structures? That's one question.
Yeah. Any from the side? Or... Yes, go ahead.
Recently, I have gone through news that in India, possibly in Punjab, or you can say Rajasthan, if I'm missing, due to the solar plants, there is the huge extraction of the waters for cooling that plants. Okay. And it is also impacting the rise of the temperature of that area rising. So how to address this issue and how we can get the lessons from the either US or some other countries? Yeah, because the green technology is also negatively affecting in some cases to how to address.
Any other this side? Anjali? Yeah. No. Okay. Yeah.
Government policy to take care of the uncertainty, especially for small and medium firms in India. Because even the big firms cannot visualize what they have to do given the kind of tariffs which are coming it's an everyday news.
Yeah.
So if the big firms cannot anticipate, then how do we foresee what government can do for the small and medium firms? Thank you.
Yes. All right. And yeah, microphone.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Specific question which might be slightly different from your conversation, but it gets into the aspect of green transformation. So I'm being optimistic, but in the Indian context, when we would initiate our emission trading system in near future, how do you think in an economy where manufacturing is already so small, And if we are floating out carbon credits, would there be domestic purchasing of credits? I mean, or the market just might crash in its initial instances. So I'm just curious to, ex ante understand.
Yeah. Okay. Good. So over to you, Kelly.
Well, I'll try to tackle some of the questions together. I think the hardest one is, why has Europe been so slow? And I don't have a great answer for that. And the only country I've really spent time studying is Germany. But I would say Germany was really taken by surprise by China. I know that for sure. In fact, when I was doing the research for my 2010 book, the globalization book, I went to Germany and I tried to interview some of the manufacturers there, and it was inconceivable to them at the time that they would not continue to be the technology providers. And in fact, they were the main technology providers for the solar industry in China. Had a big aha moment when I was in China visiting one of the Chinese solar manufacturers. I had gone through this whole long production line, been really shocked by how it was completely automated. There were no workers, in the factory, and went to lunch in the company cafeteria with the CTO of this company, and was in line and trying to concentrate because we were speaking in Chinese. And all of a sudden I realized behind me, I was not hearing Chinese, I was hearing German. And I turned around and the whole cafeteria was filled with German workers. And I said, what are they all doing here? And he pointed out the window and he said, oh, see, that's the parallel production line we're building. And they're installing all of the equipment for this parallel production line. And this was this huge aha moment for me that, okay, they've bought all this technology. Actually, these workers are coming over and assembling the assembly line, which was going to be completely automated. I mean, this was in 2010. And I think the Germans were so sure that they would continue to be the technology providers that they were complacent. And there was a big division, of course, in Germany of the equipment providers versus the final assemblers. So some of the final assemblers ended up going bankrupt. So I think taken by surprise. And in the US, I would say we're just totally myopic. We don't have that global perspective that I detect so strongly in China. And I think it's because so many of the Chinese went. My best explanation for that is that they studied overseas and went back with this very global perspective. And we don't do that as much as we should, in my opinion, in the United States. And so I think there was also just a total lack of awareness of what was going on everywhere else. In terms of technology policy and RD&D structures, I would say, I think we know that the steadiness of investment is important. And researchers cannot do big, ambitious things on year-to-year funding and unpredictable funding. And so the more you can set up, like a 5-year funding stream and set goals, the better. We had real success in the United States with the Sunshot Initiative, which was an Obama initiative, where we just set a cost goal, right, or a price goal that we would achieve a certain price in a certain number of years, and it just focused everyone's attention. And the Chinese also, through their planning, do that all the time. Here's our goal, and once everyone understands the goal, they can get behind it. I wouldn't say the U.S. does a great job, because most of the funding is year-to-year funding. So that is a very difficult structure. In the Chinese system, it's more of a 5-year plan funding structure. So I think some certainty, durability in the funding streams is important, clarification of goals. I also think demonstration is an important thing, which the US has struggled with. Obviously, as you move kind of through the innovation ecosystem from research to development to demonstration, it gets more expensive. And the US government is pretty uncomfortable with building demonstration plants. And because they're expensive and you're making a big bet on something. And the Chinese are completely not uncomfortable with demonstration, but you learn a lot through demonstration. So I think that's maybe the third lesson I would say. In terms of government policy to manage the uncertainty with tariffs coming every day, you know, what can I say? But it's in a very uncertain time. I think a lot of countries are trying to figure out how to create free trade agreements with other countries, or trying to ascertain whether they can create a special deal, you know, India-US deal. The Chinese are trying to figure out, can they cut a China-US deal? So, you know, I think President Trump is purposefully trying to create a lot of uncertainty. I think that's his strategy. Yeah.
No, there's your question on markets, right? So the ETS one, yeah. Oh, starting with that. So the question is, what is ETS directed towards? Let's understand that if there are designated entities, the ETS so far helps in very simple terms, because if we have a limit of 100 and I do it at 120 and you do it at 80, then we can exchange the 20. So the expectation is everybody would tend to improve at some point of time. Now, whether the markets will be made, we have not seen much success on offsets in India. We have always seen, whether it is REC or whether it is the PAT scheme, I'm talking in Indian context, which you will be aware of ISIDs, you would have had excess supplies and less demand, the prices has fallen. So a success of the carbon, which you are saying about the carbon trading scheme in India, lies on the standard setter or the regulator improving his standards continually over time, and that would lead to improvement. So that's my only point as far as, and I'm limiting myself to domestic cap and trade markets. That's the key. But it is important to understand that they are short-lived, because if you improve and I don't have an incentive to improve beyond a point, because my marginal cost of improving beyond, I'm already at 80, so the incentives are far lower. So these markets are tied over a period of time, and if they are understood to be forever living, it is not. We should not be seeing globally. I see this problem, and I really don't want another global financial crisis on derivatives on carbon markets and carbon credits, which is getting toyed as a new asset class. It is not. It is not a new asset class. It is an asset class which will not secularly increase, but it will actually come down. So you might have a crisis. So we should not be dealing with carbon credits as an asset class at all.
Yes, sir.
Yes. You see, in this whole idea of a transition, energy transition, electricity transition, industrial transition, I think the tough challenge is to choose the right policy instruments. And clearly, leaving markets alone will not get us to where we want. And my view is that this carbon market mechanism is not such a powerful instrument as it is made out to be. There are far better instruments, far more effective instruments. And we in India have had some success with those instruments. And I hope we will do other smarter things and not rely only on this market mechanism, because the underlying understanding is like this, that if the price difference is modest, then this pricing mechanism will work. But if you're wanting a disruptive change where the price difference is huge, then you need other things. So just to give you an example of our solar mission, when we began, the price was 17 rupees a unit. The price it was to compete against was 4.5 rupees a unit. So any such pricing mechanism would not have worked. We did something else and it worked. So I think that's the way to think of our transition. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Well, friends, I think we have to draw this discussion to a close, much to our disliking, because this discussion became, sort of so rich that it's very hard to draw close to this. And for that, I really want to thank Kelly for finding time out of her very busy schedule in Delhi. It was packed 3 or 4 days, just 4 days, yes, because she is with the group of her students from the Fletcher School, and then she chaired a very high-powered panel at Raisina Dialogue day before. And so she is all over the city, and and despite that, she found time for being with us and give us this scintillating address or seminar. And of course, the other two distinguished panelists enrich the discussion further. And this is not, by the way, I forgot to mention, this is not the first time she spoke at ISID. Way back a couple of years earlier, I think the very first seminar on green industrial policy which we had was with her, and Arunaba and few others were there in that session. And since then, we have been taking this forward, and we'll collaborate more with you as we go along. And of course, one of your former students, Iswan Narasimham, is very often in ISID and our seminars. And thank you for agreeing to be part of that group, to write on, the project that we started with UNU Wider. So Kelly is going to contribute and co-author a paper, a chapter of that book we are assembling. So thank you very much once again, Kelly, Mr. Shankar, and Dhruvo, for this very rich discussion, and everyone who participated. So we, just close this discussion, and we'll continue this seminar series on green industrial policy. Thank you.